Good morning. Before we get started, I want to introduce y'all to some people. My back row, would y'all stand, my students, will you stand up? In case you don't know, today is Reach Day at the Capitol. Reach Day is a program, these are ninth graders. You get in it in the 8th grade, and then you stay in it for the rest of your high school career. It's a way to earn extra dollars when you go to college. I will remind you that if you have excess funds in your campaign accounts, that it would be nice. You can donate. It costs $1,500 per student to get started in the 8th grade. And then they build on that, and then colleges offer an additional amount of money, and there's a lot of different ways, but you can get probably a minimum of $10,000 to go in addition to the hope and all that to go towards that. These are my 5 students from Murray County, and their leader is Fina Petty. She's right here in front of them, and she said she'd put her 5 kids up against any 50 out there in the hall. But I would like for y'all to welcome them to the rules. All right, bow your heads, join me please. Gracious Heavenly Father, here we are again, asking for your forgiveness, saying thank you for all the wonderful things you do for each one of us. Keep us in your hands. Let us do things that please you, and when we don't, please forgive us. Lead us and guide us. Let us do things that are good for the state of Georgia. I ask these things in the name of my Savior, Jesus. Amen. Y'all know the rules. Ready to begin, Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here for the first time asking for H.R. 1198. That is a resolution urging Congress to fully fund the per diem rate for nursing home rate for the veterans' homes at 75%. This works in tandem with the resolution H.R. 888, which is on the back page, which I've asked before. So those two work in tandem with each other, but H.R. 1198, which is at the top under modified rule under the first page, those two work together. And I'm just here asking one more time for H.R. 1107 near the top of the page on the first page under modified open rule on that resolution.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Brockway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fifth one from the bottom on the first page there under modified open is SB 139. It was a bill introduced last year by Senator Hunter Hill, and since he's not here, we decided to borrow it for a House bill. Didn't think he'd mind. We added to that House Bill 963, which made it to rules, but it was really late in the session, so it didn't get a chance to move forward. But basically what the bill does is allow the Department of Education, along with a technical college system, to develop a list of certifications that students can earn while they're in high school, and it pushes that out there and has some reporting requirements and so forth. So that's the bill, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Come before you this morning asking for Senate Bill 330, which is the third from the bottom on the first page under modified open rule. This is a Green Agricultural Education Act. It would set up pilot programs in elementary schools for education in agriculture, and also codify the 3-component model in our high schools, the classroom instruction, supervised agricultural experience, and FFA. The second bill that I'd request your favorable consideration is the last bill under structured rule on page 2, which is Senate Bill 458, which deals with CUVA. Currently, if you're older than 65, you receive a reduced penalty if you break your covenant. This would give that same reduced penalty to citizens who are over 65 who've been in the covenant for more than 13 years, who are a member of a LLC or a partnership, and you will have a substitute on your desk in the morning regarding this bill. There was just a slight change that was made.
Any questions? Well, yep, hold on. Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, isn't it true that currently a lot of counties are recognizing this reduced penalty, but some are not? And therefore, the purpose of the language you're doing is to clarify and make sure that the treatment is fair and equal all over Georgia.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, there are some counties that do recognize this, but the law seems to be a little bit vague, and this would just make it consistent.
No more questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Martin. Boy, he's got a good bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. I have two bills today. The first one is SB 382, which is on the back page under Structured Rule, number 2. This is this codifies Governor Deal's optometrist executive order from the bill that we passed last year with regards to training for those doing the procedure we approved last year. And then the second one I have is SR 821, which would set up and recognize cyber IT corridors, one in Augusta and the other in Savannah, right around Savannah.
We have a question. Let me have a question about that. Mr. Hatchett, where are you? Okay, Mr. Hatchett. If you go to Little Oak Mulgee, y'all know where that is? That's the state park down here. You get off 16, turn right, and out in the middle of. Thank you. What is the name of that road sign on the way to Little Oak Mulgee? It's the information highway or corridor, the technical information corridor or something. Are y'all going to be taking their name away from them?
It's not our intention. If you'd like to, we can, but it's not my intention to do that.
Mr. Hatchett, how many buildings have y'all got out there on that technical highway? Oh, the answer is 0, by the way. Have some nice looking barns, though, I'll tell you that. Well, I thought you were responsible for that, since you're responsible for everything down in Dublin. Anything else?
No, sir, unless you'd like me to continue speaking.
PK, you're walking on thin ice. Okay. No
Thank you,
more
Mr.
questions.
Chairman.
Mr. Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I come before you for the second time on Senate Bill 386. It's on the back page of Modified Structured Rule. I ask for your consideration. I would like to tell you that we will be hearing House Bill 930, Chairman Tanner's bill, in our committee today, and I feel very confident that it will move out of committee to rules. I'll answer any questions.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Rakestraw.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I come before you to ask for two bills. The first one is H.R. 913, which is a House Study Committee on pre-arrest diversion programs to look at pathways and ways to get people into mental health and addiction treatment. And the next one is HR 447, which is a bill that declares pornography a public health concern to help combat the demand side of human trafficking.
Do you want to do SB 425?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to do SB 425?
Oh, is that on here?
That's your
Oh,
sur-
okay,
that's
yes,
your serv-
SB
that's your
425. I
survey
didn't realize
bill.
that was on here. Yes, SB 425 also, which is a bill from, by the surveyors, consistent with the one that we passed in the House, and it is to change the licensing requirements to take hydrology out for land surveyors.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Burke.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring Senate Bill 357, which is the top bill on the back of your sheet. This bill is a result of our healthcare task force that we've been working on this past year, and what we have identified is we spent 25% of our state budget on healthcare, but our outcomes are not nearly as robust as we, as policy leaders, would like, and this sets up a healthcare policy director and a healthcare coordination and innovation council to try to break silos and improve the health outcomes of Georgians. I'll be glad to answer questions, Mr. Chairman.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. SB 381 is not actually on the blue, it's on the yellow sheet. It's a surplus lines bill. The state of Georgia, when we have non-admitted carriers that are domiciled in the state of Georgia, they're not authorized to be able to offer insurance in a state. All this does is allow them to be able to offer insurance in our state. If there are no questions, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it.
We got one, Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Thompson, you're on the Senate Finance Committee, correct?
I am, sir.
And that committee is currently holding House Bill 793 that has to do with some tax exemptions for a museum in Cartersville to be constructed. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe they're holding that because I'll be carrying that in the Senate.
Is it out of the committee now?
It will be out today if I have anything to say about it, sir.
So it's still in the committee?
It is.
I would certainly like to see that move out. Thank you, Mr.
I share your sentiments.
Again, notice that he came off the yellow page. We're getting short on time, and it's hard to make your three visits over here, Senate. Your three visits over here. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ligon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring before you Senate Bill 101, which is on page 1. This allows state employees to receive credit towards retirement from their service as full-time hourly employees. Of course, they have to pay the full actuarial value in order to acquire that service.
No questions, y'all. This is the one concerning, back in the past, we used to have something called full-time, part-time. You had employees that were full-time employees but were counted part-time employees, and it gives them the right to, I'm going to help you with your bill here, Mr. Ligon. It gives them the right to buy up to 10 years worth of that time. I will tell you that it will be extremely expensive for them to buy in, and but that's what they need, the opportunity, and if they've got the money, they can get in. Otherwise, they'll continue on just like they are now. No more questions, Mr. Ligon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And then now we have my senator, Mr. Huffstetler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Who was very instrumental in getting my fracking bill out of the Senate and down to the governor Friday. By the way, my fracking bill is done. Didn't take but 2 years, but that's okay. Mr. Huffstetler.
You know, when I was up there presenting on Friday, I wanted to say, thank God it's freaking fracking Friday. But I was afraid I might mess it up and get tongue-tied, so I decided not to do that. but we are glad that it's out. I have 3 bills that aren't on the sheet yet, but I didn't want to come over here until the fracking bill was passed out. But one of them is
Are they on the yellow sheet?
that I haven't seen the yellow sheet, so I'm not sure. Actually, 2 of them can't be because they're in full committee today, but I did want to talk about them if I could.
Go ahead.
The Senate Resolution 195 is left over from last year. That was calling a constitutional convention for full-time legislatures in Washington to get together and look at term limits. Senator David Perdue was in support of that, and we had passed that out last year. The other 2 are in full committee today. Senate Bill 364 has to do with the ratio of PAs. Can I not bring that today and talk about it?
No.
Okay.
Do what?
I'm not assuming. I just wanted to take my 3 times up if I could.
He's getting credit for a visit on something that you better come prepared.
Yeah.
He better come prepared to that committee.
I'm certainly not assuming. I just wanted to get one of my 3
what's
visits in.
What's the other one?
The other one is Senate Bill 355. That's also in full committee today in a different committee, and I'm hopeful it will pass out, but we don't know. But it sunsets Senate Bill 31 from 2009. It has no effect on current construction with Plant Vogel, but it would say that it would come back to the House and the Senate in the future if any future constructions were looked at.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you're the Senate Finance Committee Chairman, correct?
Correct.
And you have in your committee House Bill 793?
I do.
Did you hear Senator Thompson's comment or his answer to my question earlier?
I did. He was unable to be there for that meeting on Wednesday. He had a conflict. The votes weren't there. I didn't take a vote because it would have been a mistake to take a vote.
I understand, and I appreciate your leadership on the issue. I just want to clarify, is his comment correct that it's coming up for a vote today?
It is coming up for a vote today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wait a second. You're not done.
Yes.
Mr. Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hofstadter, I've also got a concern about a bill that's been in your committee for a long time. House Bill 658 passed out of this House way back in the first week of the session. I've asked twice to even have a hearing and haven't even received a response from your office. Is there a reason that we can't even get a response?
Now tell me which one that is, because I've got about 40 over there on the numbers. What bill is that?
That's the bill that applies only to the Cobb Convention and Visitors Bureau with respect to taxation on the length of time of a sunset provision. It has to be done as a general legislation because of the nature of the hotel motel tax. It applies only to Cobb County. It's a very simple piece, and it passed out of here unanimous.
I will check on that. Have you requested it this year?
Twice.
Okay.
By letter.
I will check on that and see. It may be on, we've got 3 different subcommittees meeting today. It may be on that, but everything that's been requested should have had at least a subcommittee hearing, so I'll check on that today on 658.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate that.
No more questions. Bye. Ms. Tate.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and the committee. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend and you're going to stay out of the cold today as the weather drops. I have on page 2 under the modified open rule, Senate Bill 457. It was introduced by a young man in South Cobb High School who felt that we should have drills for safety in lieu of the fact that we've got issues in other places which we don't want to have here, but we want them to be prepared in case the type of thing that happened in Parkland and Sandy Hook ends up happening in this area. So I present that to you and the chairman, Powell, in here. They made some changes in the bill, which are welcome changes and very good changes, and so I sincerely ask you to take a look at that and to put it on the calendar so the House can take a look at the bill. And if there are no questions.
Well, there is. Well, hold on a second.
Okay.
The bill requires every public school
And private.
and private. What is the situation with private schools right now?
Private schools are doing the drills by and large. There are not that many schools within Georgia that are not doing the drills. The frequency of the drills was not what he was concerned about. They do them in Cobb County and they do them in other systems, but there are some systems within the state that are not doing them.
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, Ms. Powell.
Is it not true that we had added under current statute deals with public schools and the drills, and then we added private schools because in the infinite wisdom of the Public Safety Committee, we had decided that if there's a disaster or an active shooter or whatever the circumstance might be, that the private schools that those kids would be in just as much jeopardy as those in public schools. And this basically says that they will adhere to whatever the drilling and such like that based on recommendations from GEMA.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the House added that, and we are greatly appreciative for that.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My bill, Senate Bill 331, is not on the blue sheet yet, but should be hopefully soon. It's a bill that would allow lottery winners over $250,000 to have anonymity, to allow them to be confidential. Right now, if you win a large amount of lottery at $400 million, you are often a victim of scammers and predators or harassment. Plus, in several cases, there have been people murdered and robbed and victimized in more severe ways. So I think this is a very positive thing. In fact, when the lotteries get large, we hope that people in neighboring states will come across the border to buy in Georgia because, quite frankly, I think Georgia citizens want to have that confidentiality for their own safety and protection. Texas, Delaware, Kansas, North Dakota have similar laws. Maryland treats it as a budget issue, and they're protected from the Open Records Act there. And then several other states have other provisions that go through corporations or shells to keep confidentiality.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't you agree this might help out lottery sales?
I think it will. It certainly, even today, Tennessee, for instance, I have an office in Tennessee, and they don't have confidentiality. But when I'm in Tennessee, I buy tickets because if I win $400 million, I want it to say Knoxville, Tennessee. Maybe they won't know it's Steve Henson in Snow Mountain, Georgia. You know, I think it will help sales, and certainly it will protect people's safety. And Representative Stevens has agreed to handle it.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, would it by any chance, because there's $331 million that I'm going to win this week, can you be retroactive on it?
I can ask for your help. We could maybe get it to the governor soon and get him to sign it, and then you can hold your ticket for about 30 days at least until you cash it.
No more questions. Thank you. Mr. Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm just here to ask, I know it's still on the yellow sheet, but in movement to the blue, Senate Bill 82, which mimics last year's House Bill 222 as it relates to Guard and Reserve. It would allow them eligibility for HOPE if they are serving in this state.
Whose Senate bill is that?
That's Senator Jackson. He's been so kind as to allow us to use it as a vehicle for House Bill 222.
Okay. No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Mr. Albers.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. on your second page under Structure Rule, Senate Bill 328. During the off session, we had a study committee review tax credits and exemptions for the purpose of putting a return on investment on those. We found several to be extraordinary, as we can imagine. The film tax credit, the R&D tax credit, and historic tax credits came back very favorably, but there were a few that did not come back so favorably. They were either not being used, utilized a very small amount, or costing the state more money to administrate than we were actually getting a return for that. One is the $150 tax credit that we offer for driver's education. We have already made changes to the law since then. Most folks who do that are getting a substantial discount on their children's insurance. Having a 15-year-old right now, I know it well. We only had 800 plus people use that credit exemption last year. We also removed the diesel particulate emission reduction technology equipment credit, which had not been claimed for the last 3 years of 2013, 14, and 15 when we had the numbers to show. And then last but not least, the qualified transportation credit, which gave $25 to an employee, which again was barely being used and causing more time and money to administrate than the value back. Also, in addition to this, thanks to Chairman Powell and Ways and Means, we found that with both the federal tax changes as well as House Bill 918, that there was one provision that could harm potentially some of our large businesses that have an international presence here in Georgia. Thanks to the good work by that committee as well as our friends with the Georgia and Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, we are going to make sure we remove the provision, what's for GILTI, which would make sure that Georgia companies aren't going to be taxing foreign income. We have not done that in the past, but with the new parity of those two codes, we want to make sure we don't in any way harm that. We believe this will only continue to help with both those tax plans to encourage more growth right here in Georgia.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Albers, since you're talking about your tax regulation, your tax committee, study committee, I think I understood you to say you've determined that some tax exemptions and credits are positive for the state and some are not. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, Representative Coomer, I think that some of them are so good we should consider extending them, because if I'd give you $5 and you give me $100 in return, I'd like to know I can give you $500 and get a bigger return.
Or for example, if I had a private investor who wanted to build a museum, say in Cartersville, and we wanted to help by having the local and state portions of the sales tax exempted for construction materials in that museum, that might be a good way to also shape policy. I did notice you're the vice chairman of the Finance Committee in the Senate. Are you going to be at the committee meeting today?
I will be at that committee meeting,
Great.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman, and it's a good bill.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a question about this bill.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm concerned about the driver education courses credit because we know that students who go through driver's education are normally better drivers. And I've had some questions from constituents who feel that we should do the opposite, which is increase the exemption as opposed to eliminating it so that it will be more attractive to parents to try and get their kids through driver's ed. Did you all consider that?
Well, and I appreciate that very much. I think everyone in the General Assembly wants to have all kids do that. If you think about how we made changes to Joshua's law many years ago, we actually put the requirements in for them to take driver's education, as well as typical student or youth at that point is going to get a 10% reduction in their insurance year over year. And then we have another program set up to help grant those who might be on a free and reduced lunch who need help through the state in order to pay for that for those that can't get there. So with 800 some odd people using it in the state, being a sub-fraction of 1/100th of a percent, it just doesn't seem to make sense for what we're doing.
Ms. Dempsey.
Yes. Good to see you here this morning. I just wanted to give you a little tip that actually I'm glad you brought up Joshua's law, because that relates to a family that lives in in Whip Coomer's district, and the mother lives in my district. So that's a very important measure.
Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I come to you today with three little retirement bills. 129 is the one for the veterans, gives them the opportunity for a little buy-in at full actuarial cost. 197 is a bill that provides that all of our retirement bills from here forth will be, buy-in will be at full actuarial cost. In the past, we have allowed some people to buy in at less than full actuarial cost, and this would put a stop to that. And 337 is a bill that was requested by some of the cities to help them better manage their programs. I'll entertain any questions.
Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Black, I just had a quick question about Senate Bill 129. Just to clarify, under our current statute, people who are Vietnam era people prior to the draft ending can buy in, but people after that cannot buy in currently. Is that the case?
I'm not positive about that. Right now, I don't know of any provisions that allows them to buy in and what conditions they buy in. But this will set the in code the fact that they can buy in, and provided there's no that time is not used for any other retirement program, and that they can finance this purchase over a period of time up to 10 years, and this will be a real positive tool to recruit these veterans, because these veterans they make excellent employees because of the discipline that's been instilled in them in the military and their additional maturity that they have. And most of these folks would not have a large sum of money to buy in for some retirement. So this really opens up some opportunity.
So, Senator, if there's somebody, for example, at Moody Air Force Base that served in the Air Force for 4 years and got out and went to work for the state of Georgia, GBI or somebody, they could buy that 4 years. They're not going to get military retirement for that 4 years, but they could buy that in as part of our system.
That's right.
And that would apply to current people who've gotten out of the military in the last any amount of time. How far back would that go?
There's no time limit on it.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Madam Pro Tem.
I had a question. Thank you, Senator. On the 10-year buy-in, I guess that's in Senate Bill 197. Is that correct? So this would set a policy that if you didn't have the money to do the buy-in, you could finance it, I guess, over 10 years, which would make it very attractive, because even though it might be expensive, there's no actuarial cost as of the day you buy in. But after that time, there's a big bonus to whoever buys in. In fact, we saw that this year with the teachers' retirement, for example. The state had to pay $2 billion in state retirement costs for teachers, over $300 million of which was just to try to bring it up to health. My concern is that this would encourage more legislation to allow more people to be on our retirement, which we know is very costly to the state. The fiscal note is actually always misleading, because it's only as of the date that the person buys in. Every day after that, there is absolutely a net cost to the state. Is that true?
Maybe that's a little misleading from the standpoint that it would be based on the actuarial data that the systems are using today. And every 5 years, they re-update their projections as to the criteria they use in calculating these costs. And I am extremely concerned about the status of all of our retirement systems. But you've got to realize that we're right now sitting in the middle of the most unprecedented storm where all of these negative events have converged at one time. The recession that we just went through, combined with the fact that we've got retirees out there that are drawing retirement benefits that pretty well are on par with the active employees that are paying in. In the history, we went through a long history of when there was increases in salaries every year, and this was factored into our actuarials at the time. So we're going to see eventually, when we get through paying for some of the sins of the past, we're going to see some situations where we're going to see these retirement systems become extremely well funded.
Further,
Mr. Knight. Oh,
I
I'm
have
sorry.
follow-up
I'm sorry.
questions.
Follow
So
up.
I appreciate your perspective on that, and I agree. My concern is that with fewer state employees and retirees living longer, we're getting an increasingly incongruence there with how many are paying in. By allowing future persons to buy in and finance over 10 years, my concern is that as a legislature, we would be encouraging more legislation to allow more people to buy in, which would further burden our retirement system. Because the reason someone would want to finance and buy it in is because they absolutely would benefit greater than the cost of buying in.
Well, I see your point, but I can also envision a situation where that our actuaries have gotten so conservative now that they're requiring so much that these people that's going to be buying in the future, or they're buying now and going to be paying in the future, they're going to be paying an amount that's going to be a positive for the retirement system beyond the actual cost.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things to follow up on. One, I heard that, and I think this committee in the past we've dealt with it, is this retroactive or is this prospective, I guess you could say. So I want to make sure I understand that the bill is retroactive, meaning somebody can go back, versus from this point forward they could do it. What is the answer to that question?
I'm sorry, y'all. I have hearing aids, as some of you might have noticed.
Is the bill retroactive?
And I was getting a phone call in that was ringing in, so all I could hear was, so I didn't get to hear your question.
Is the bill retroactive or is it prospective?
The 197 will be, first off, it puts the power in the hands of the retirement systems to set the standards, and that will be based on the standards that they set right now.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Black, isn't it true? I'm going to try to do this in a question. What you said in your thing, I think you said that we're in this situation because of all these conservative estimates. You know, isn't it true that it's just the opposite? We are using a return rate of, in some of our plans, of 7.5, where national averages are down around 5 and 5.5. And if we were to use that actual discount rate, it would cost us billions of dollars. And I understand this, but the way I look at this bill, and my question to you is, it looks like somebody that could have been with the state for 2 years can then go and buy up to 10, I think you said, or up to 6, up to 5, and finance it over a 10-year.
Up to 5 and have 10 years to pay for it. Yes.
Up to 5 after being here 2 and finance it over 10 years. And I would respectfully ask that we look at the actuaries, because as Chairman Meadows said, the day they buy in, there may be no cost to the taxpayer, but the minute after that and the whole 10-year period while we're paying in, the taxpayers are paying this. And what concerns me most, isn't it true, about the current people that are in our retirement system that we do have promises and commitments to, and I think those people need to come first.
Well, I will submit to you that we're having to pay right now for sins of the past, because there were actuaries that was done back then that was based on data that is not withstood the challenges of this great recession that we just went through. And we've got history prior to that where we have had actual areas that were generating surpluses. And one of the challenges when you do that is we begin to get very generous in some of the benefits that we allowed in, and we've allowed people to buy in at less than full actuarial costs, and we've provided COLAs that wasn't funded and this sort of stuff. And so it's all a matter of good business. If we apply good business practices, then we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today.
No more questions.
Suggest we
No more questions. Thank you. Mr. Gooch, are you awake?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be brief.
Good.
SB 425, second page, second bill from the top. It's a bill dealing with surveyors and their licensing requirements. It allows for two different classes of licenses for surveyors. One that wants to simply do a boundary survey, and the other is for the surveyors like you have today that do design work. We are losing surveyors every day in Georgia. Only one qualified last year from Georgia. The rest are coming in from out of state, and we'd love to keep the business in state.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hatchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for H.R. 1376 down the front page. It simply asks the Rural Development Council to give the hospital industry a stage and really look at the finances and viabilities of all of them even more.
Ms. Tankersley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for Senate Bill 425, surveyors.
Mr. Willard. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On your yellow sheet, we sent back to committee Senate Bill 325. Senator Watson's bill is the military affairs bill that we had conversation about is perfected and will actually do something.
And it's on the yellow sheet? Yes, sir. So we can do it Friday. Ms. Dempsey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are two resolutions on the front page under modified open. H.R. 1364, which is, both of these are encouraging resolutions is all. The 64 deals with broadening eligibility and increasing funding to the breast and cervical cancer prevention program. It is both underfunded on the federal and state level, and I would never expect us to jump ahead on that, but to keep that conversation alive for low-income, underserved, and uninsured. And then on H.R. 1375 is simply an encouraging resolution to advise all public and private schools to educate students and parents on the dangers of meningococcal disease.
Would you say that name again?
Meningococcal. I've been practicing.
Okay. All right. We hadn't been able to say it. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by Senate Bill 330, Senator Wilkins' bill, the agricultural bill.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to place my name beside Senate Bill 457, Senator Tate's bill.
We are certainly going to interrupt all our proceedings so that Mr. Miller can come present 6 or 7 bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd been here earlier, but my Honda wouldn't start. Dang foreign cars, you know what I'm saying? Oh, me. I'm here on a bill this morning, Mr. Chairman, if it pleases you and the committee, regarding interstate understanding of the state of Georgia boundary line. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to get some of those folks up there in Tennessee paying Georgia taxes if we could. All kidding aside, we want to send this resolution on to Washington and encourage our friends in the federal government to come to a final decision on, there it is, on the boundary. As many of you are probably familiar, there's precedent on this case between Virginia and West Virginia, and there's also significant issues in regard to water and regard to other issues that would be impactful on our state. And I would just ask for the committee's favorable representation on it.
Mr. Fleming, do you have a question on this one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President Pro Tem, on that bill 794, could you relate to and talk a second about the theory of circulation of water and what it may have to do with this particular bill?
You know, that's a great question, and the theory of circulation of water would be that there's a finite amount of water in the world, and that the same amount of water in the world exists today that existed at the beginning of time, and that water goes from precipitation to evaporation, to condensation, all those processes, but there's a finite amount of water, and water is a precious resource, and we need to make sure that we're handling that water appropriately.
You did real well with that. That's the one I knew, believe it or not. Any other questions? Since I've got others, if you've got questions of Mr. Miller, raise your hand. Got down here on the end.
Down here, Senator.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
That's Miss Smith, Senator.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. I know.
So, in Georgia's generosity, I want to point out that we do let this river flow north, and we do think we have some claim to it based on that fact as well. Thank you.
I think that's
one of the few that flows north in the world.
Point well made. And another point with that regard is there's no water taken out of by the state of Tennessee, no water taken out west of Chattanooga, and it really doesn't impact them, frankly. So.
Well, let's just find out how much water is coming out of that river and say that's how much we're going to take every day.
And put a straw in it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Suck hard. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the gentleman from Augusta for his question as well. Thank you, Ms. Smith, for your question. Y'all have a great day. Thank you. And by the way, if there's anything I can help with you on the other side of the building, I know there's not much, but if I can, the members of this committee and this fine body in the House, please know that you just need to call upon me. Thank you.
Mr. Coomer needs, President Pro Tem, Mr. Coomer needs help in the Finance Committee.
Mr. President, you are a member, you are an ex officio member of the Senate Finance Committee, correct?
That's correct.
Sure could use your help on a little bill that has to do with the museum in Cartersville, House Bill 793.
You know, I had a discussion on that bill this morning, actually, frankly, and my point was my colleague was pointing out that the other instances where the example was used for a convocation center and other issues were built on state property. They're paying sales tax and et cetera, et cetera. My position was, well, we have a benefactor here who's giving his own personal resources. So if an individual, for instance, gives $200 million, then we're charging him $14 million in order for him to give away $200 million. And that's ridiculous. So I'm a real advocate for you, Bill.
Boy, you've answered the question real good. Now, Mr. Coomer, he's had 7 chances up here with everybody that came up. Anything else?
Brilliant response.
Thank you. Thank y'all very much.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name next to Senate Bill 357, the Health Coordination and Innovation Council for the state of Georgia.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside House Resolution 940 and Senate Bill 129.
Anybody else? Okay, here we go. This is setting the calendar for Wednesday. Under modified open, H.R. 1376. Hatchet leaves on his bill. Somebody answer that. Got a house full. Okay, you've Anybody make a motion on that? All those in favor signify by aye. It's on. Any opposed? Okay, it's on. Under modified open, SB 333. Have a move. Do I hear a second? All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified open, SB 357. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Modified open, SB 425. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified open, SR 794. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Under structured, SB 382, move. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? We're done.
Ready to move.